a contemporary level. If there's something about the way in which a well-ordered family functions and how parents can bring about a sense of justice through all the travail of family life, if they can keep the family together, that very skill someone then can use in an enlarged family, a clan. One can take the skills one learns from the family to an enlarged family or clan, and they can then see that the very skill in the one can be transferred to the other. One more step. The very insights that one can discover on what makes a family function together, ideally, then the same kinds of ways of dealing with things can help a larger family, what I'm loosely calling a clan. The same principles then can be established in terms of a city. If the same dynamics, family, clan, city, or the empire, or the state. What are we saying? We're saying that there's something that is learned on one, that you can find evidence in the need for it in the second, the third, or the fourth. That's the principle of structural similarity.
Dr. Gramsci, are you suggesting that the Greeks made this discovery?
I'm saying that in the way in which this language is structured, there is already an analogy at place. It's a relationship between the individual and the universe. As the soul's unity is to air, so to the universe. They're seeing a hierarchical ordered structure, aren't they?
Could this not have been the inheritance of a legacy from Egypt, wherein they acknowledged the law of correspondence, or otherwise known as the Hermetic axiom?
Oh, sure.
So it's not necessarily a discovery on their part, but just a reformulation of an acknowledgement of a law already known.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. There's no doubt about the fact that in classic studies, Haley studied in Egypt. That's where he went to study his geometry. There's no doubt. One of the biggest missing pages in history, there are two, as far as I can see. One is the contribution of the Phoenicians, and the other is the contribution of the Egyptians. And what we need is text to come out to make that connection tighter. Oh, I certainly agree with you. And especially in mathematics, astronomy, art. Oh, yeah, fast, medicine.
Wouldn't you think that the Eurocentric and ethnocentric tradition of scholarship that we've inherited in the West has been an obstacle to that discovery to some degree?
From what I understand, that certainly may play a role in it. The other problem is cracking the problem of hieroglyphics and capturing abstract thought. It's very difficult. It's no doubt that they had an oral tradition. You see, when people talk about the classic world, like we're doing tonight, you know that we're not talking about any more than 8 sentences when we're talking about these three thinkers. And we're getting them from someone called Aristotle, who lived many years later, 200 years later or more. And we're forming ideas of what they said based upon Aristotle. I'm using other sources for this. So let me put it another way. The great tragedy, one of the greatest tragedies that I know of in terms of my interest, is the fire of Alexandria, Alexandrian Library. That's what we needed. That's what we need to piece together. So I don't think it's Eurocentrism.
Or at least a possible contribution there.
Pardon me?
Couldn't that be a partial contribution? I mean, even when we look at Egyptian hieroglyphics as predominantly as we know them today, they've been interpreted by people who have a Christian perspective in terms of their translation, which naturally biases their perspective.
Oh, well, that's natural. Yeah, that's quite true. It's
so
quite natural.
So our ability to be able to look at them more objectively is still in its incipient stage.
That's nothing I'm suggesting tonight would be in any way challenge that. No, I would certainly go along with that. I would go further and say that, see, if we could only find one book of medicine of theirs, one work on geometry, one book on astronomy, it would break the ice.
Are you familiar with any of the recent controversial observations made by Robert Blaval in terms of the Giza necropolis being a veritable replica of the constellation of Orion in about 10,500 BC?
Well, I'm not into, I don't doubt their parallels. I'm pretty sure that the Stonehenge architecture and sculpting, which was, 2,500 years before the Greeks, bears a certain very strict relationship between the heavens and the model of the heavens and the resulting architecture, and therefore I don't have any difficulty in tying those two together. But just to answer you, no, I don't know that work, and if you later give me the name and the book, I'll add that to my reading list.
The interesting thing about those recent discoveries, which are very controversial in Egyptology, is that it lends itself exactly to your discussion here in terms of the macrocosm being a reflection of the microcosm and vice versa. It's virtually an entire culture's investment over a tremendous period of time to replicate that, which in and of itself shows a tremendous mathematical achievement, which is not acknowledged.
No, I don't know whether it's not acknowledged. I don't know anybody who doesn't know the superiority in many fields that the Egyptians had. Certainly Herodotus mentions it, he acknowledges it. See, the difference here is that this work and the works of philosophy have to use words. We're stuck, we can only use words. So oral traditions and evidences of great archaeological works, we can't make the transition from archaeological treasures to theoretical thought. We need the concepts, we need the concepts, and therefore, unless they have a written language, that's all we can do. We can't read stones, and that's one of the tragedies.
Perhaps that's though part of the genius of geometric figures and the creation of those kinds of things, is that it, by inference, shows the degree of mentation achieved.
Oh, yeah.
So perhaps they don't leave any kind of linear thought or written form that we can see, but we see it in their works.
No doubt. No doubt about it. I totally agree with you. Yeah. And we're amazed by it. We're absolutely amazed about what the Egyptians produced thousands of years before the Greeks. No doubt about it. But what do we need? The first one who can bring up texts, words, the culture will shift to those words.
You're pointing out that this is like a prime philosophical tool, which is, could be called a hermetic axiom or has been. Could also not the prime philosophical tool, along with this, be the Pythagorean idea that all things are created from numbers?
No doubt about it, but they come later then. See, this is 600. And the belief is that Pythagoras came another 100 years later, which we'd like to touch on later. But this is still 600 BC. Yeah, oh yeah. When you're armed with the analogy and you move into number, then you can play in many levels and bring them together and find all kinds of interesting ways of talking and making distinctions. Oh, without a doubt, yeah. But as I said, this is the beginning, and what's interesting in it, there's already so much in the fragments that we can then show already has the seeds of later developments. And here's the irony is that they may in fact have gone much further, since we have no reason to believe that the little fragment that we have expresses the highest level of their reflections. We don't have it.
Could you give us any idea how this kind of naturalistic philosophy evolved in an era when the tradition was a Homeric one based upon the Iliad and the Odyssey?
No doubt.
Well, how did this in Ionia evolve away from that tradition, and what were the consequences of that?
Yeah, okay. You see, you're quite right. You see, in order to get into the Greek world, you have to go through the door of Homer. But if you go through the door